Welcome to Workplace Conflict Micro Training. This training will cover the following topics: what workplace conflict is, positive and negative impacts of workplace conflict, why resolving conflict is important, the slow method of conflict resolution, the importance of looking at conflict from different points of view, how people communicate, and helpful tips on resolving problems face-to-face with a coworker. When people work together, there will inevitably be disagreements. Some of these disagreements are minor, but some can turn into major conflicts. Major conflicts can include many kinds of hostile behaviors, including verbal abuse, passive-aggressive behavior, refusal to work with one another, withholding of information from each other, and physical violence. If conflicts are not resolved, they can lead to long-term problems, such as increased stress, decreased productivity, and low employee morale. These problems can affect individuals involved in the conflict and the team they are a part of. Knowing how to resolve conflict will help you be more successful in your professional life. There are many situations that can cause conflict between coworkers. Some common causes are disagreements about the best way to do a particular job, perceived shortcomings of coworkers, having to share limited resources, misunderstandings due to poor communication, personality differences, differences in cultural values, and even personal problems outside the work environment. Conflict is often thought of as a bad thing. However, a conflict can actually be an opportunity for employees to come together, solve work or personal problems, and then become a better or unified team. A conflict can become a problem when it is ignored or goes unresolved. An unresolved conflict can lead to long-term tension and unhappiness among employees. For this reason, it is important to address workplace conflicts and try to resolve them as soon as they arise. One way to resolve conflicts is with a technique called the slow method. The slow method can be broken down into 4 steps. Step back from the conflict. Look at the problem from the other person's point of view. Organize a plan for how to proceed. Work together with the other person to resolve the problem. The following section will describe the slow method in more detail. The first step in the slow method is to step back from the conflict. Stepping back when a conflict arises will ensure that you will more likely use logic to deal with the conflict rather than reacting emotionally. One problem with emotions is that they can be contagious. For example, when one person is angry, the other person can also become angry, escalating a fairly minor argument into a more serious, long-term conflict. Stepping back will give you time to think about the next logical action you should take. This helps separate yourself emotionally from the situation. For example, if a coworker becomes angry and verbally abusive, tell them you would prefer to continue the discussion later and then walk away. The second step of the slow method is to look at the conflict from the other person's point of view. This is an extremely valuable tool in conflict management because it often leads to a better understanding of the other person and can reduce tensions between the people involved. It is common in conflicts for one person to view the other person as unreasonable or not making sense. This can lead to one person treating the other with anger and disrespect. If you are involved in a conflict, try to realize that the other person has their own reasons for the things they do or say, even if it is difficult to understand them. Also recognize how your own actions or statements may have played a role in the conflict. Everyone has a point of view that makes sense to them. Seeing someone else's point of view does not mean you have to agree with that point of view. Recognizing factors that contribute to a different point of view will help you understand and resolve the conflict. Some factors that create a different point of view are differences in personality types, culture, religion, political views, socioeconomic status, and education levels. In addition to these factors, people's jobs can often affect their points of view. For example, if a new workplace procedure causes one worker's job to become more difficult, it could lead to the worker displaying passive-aggressive behavior. Understanding the reason behind the behavior will help prevent resentment and frustration. The third step of the slow method is to organize a plan on how to solve the problem or proceed. This means planning how you are going to talk to the other person in the conflict and what you are going to say. Items to think about include where and when you will talk to the other person, how you will start the discussion, order in which to talk about your points, best way to make your points considering a person's point of view, and a plan for what to do if the other becomes upset. The last step in the slow method is to work together to resolve the problem or find a solution. When working towards a solution, it is important to understand how people communicate. Studies have shown that people communicate in three different ways. 55% of what people communicate with is body language. 38% is with the tone of the voice, and only 7% is with the words that are said. Because most of our communication is nonverbal, it is very important to be aware of your body language and the tone of voice to avoid misunderstanding and further escalation. Knowing how people communicate can affect how we choose to resolve conflicts. There are three ways you can choose to have the interaction: face-to-face, over the phone, and email or text messaging. Because our body language and tone of voice make up over 90% of how we communicate, having a face-to-face interaction is the best option for resolving a conflict. This will help greatly reduce the likelihood of a misunderstanding. Phone calls are the next best choice if a face-to-face meeting is not possible because you are still able to communicate with the tone of your voice. Email or cell phone text messaging is the least preferred method of communication to resolve a conflict. This is because only using words or emojis greatly increases the chances of a misunderstanding. Now let's take a few minutes to discuss those face-to-face conversations and how you can be successful. Because face-to-face communication can be intimidating and stressful, the following are some tips for face-to-face conflict resolution. Stay rational and unemotional during the discussion, even if the other person becomes upset. Maintain calmness. Use a non-aggressive tone of voice, posture, and facial expressions. Maintain a respectful amount of eye contact. Be as honest as you can about your point of view without insulting the other person. Ask for the other person's point of view and opinion. Listen to the other person and try to fully understand their points. Don't interrupt the other person. Avoid talking about the other person's mistakes. If you or the other person lose your calm and get angry during the discussion, start the slow process over again. Suggest to the other person both should take a break and continue the discussion later. Once a resolution has been reached, try to agree on future steps both individuals can take to avoid the same conflict in the future. For example, if there was a disagreement between two coworkers about who was responsible for several job tasks, an agreement between them might describe who was expected to do each task. Lastly, send an email to the other person summarizing what you talked about. In this way, the agreements you have reached are officially documented and can be used for future reference. The best way to end a conflict is on a positive note. Words that communicate your appreciation, like, "I'm really glad we had this discussion," or "Thank you for talking to me about this," can make both parties feel as if the conflict was a positive experience and can lead to better communication in the future. In a perfect world, every workplace conflict would be resolved in a way that is good for everyone involved. Unfortunately, this is not always possible. Sometimes a problem will be too difficult for coworkers to work out between themselves. If you have tried to resolve a conflict with a coworker, but have not been successful, you should then take the problem to your immediate supervisor. Supervisors should be skilled and experienced in managing conflicts. They will be able to understand the point of view of all parties involved and come to a fair resolution. When people work together, there will inevitably be conflicts. If handled correctly, conflicts can be an opportunity to solve problems and make a team stronger. If left unresolved, conflicts can have extremely negative effects. In this micro-training, you have learned the slow method of resolving conflicts, which includes the following steps. Step back from the conflict. Look at the problem from the other person's point of view. Organize a plan for how to proceed. And finally, work together with the other person to resolve the problem. This training also included some other tips for dealing with conflict, such as thinking about the conflict logically instead of reacting emotionally, communicating effectively face-to-face, deciding on future actions that will prevent the conflict from reoccurring, and talking to an immediate supervisor if the conflict cannot be resolved. Now let's check your knowledge on the concepts presented in this training.